dress?
Yeah, out of the dumpster.
You have to buy the dress in order to go genocide route.
Yeah, well, he had to become a big shot.
Interesting.
That's his whole thing.
I wish my headphones would quieter. The noises are too loud. I can hear myself.
We're live, Dad. Yes.
I know.
I can hear you.
I know.
So then there I
But
was.
we haven't started yet. I did air quotes.
So they're gonna hear us talking about Pippis?
No, we're not talking about Pippis. We're done talking about Pippis.
Okay.
No more Pippis.
Well, as soon as he goes live at 12:55, they can hear us.
No, because he's been muted this whole time, and so have I. And now I'm not anymore. We came down muted. We were having this conversation. But we decided, might as well go live. Let's just go for it.
Is that drawing?
That
That was a quick drawing.
is what started the whole conversation we were on. That's a dwarf.
Who wrote that?
I did.
Corbin.
Can you read it?
He did it in the way that's going to make sense to him.
Obviously.
And that's what I asked him.
Why?
We're good.
We're mostly ad-libbing anyway.
Dad, what? You didn't see my notes, but when I was talking about the casting, that's what it looks like.
Okay, Ian, give us the...
Do you have an intro theme, like theme music?
Ba, 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 ba.
You gotta get on the stick and get some.
All right.
Hello and welcome to the podcast from Nwendolyn. I'm Corbin, and in this podcast we'll be exploring the world of Severian. Here we have Jeff and Kyle, and today we are going to be talking about dwarfs.
Yes, let's go dwarfs.
And to start, what do they look like?
Okay, so dwarves sit about the males are about 4'6", and then the females average about 4 feet tall. They're stocky, definitely a stockier build. They have a skin tone that kind of mimics a little bit of the stone underneath that they have, so they have kind of a bluer or more of a grayer tint to their skin. But other than that, yeah, no, they're gonna make my phone be quiet now. Quiet phone.
I do want to point out real quick that in Severion, the female dwarves don't have beards.
No beards. That is not a thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's always hit or miss with those. Like, do females have beards? Are females even heard of? Do they exist?
In Severion, yes, they exist. Yes, they're heard of. No, they don't have beards.
Well, because in the Tolkien's version, nobody knows if female dwarves exist. Or
Because
if they
they
just
look like the males.
pretend to be men.
That's a whole huge misnomer and a joke. It started off as a joke that was told by an actor that then became a thing that was never actually part of the lore. So, yeah, that's not even a thing in Tolkien's. Female dwarves do not have beards either.
So, like, for their appearance, is it just typical, like, short, stocky?
Yeah, short,
not
stocky. A little bit of a bulbous nose, a little bit going on there, but like they
They're
have
like stout little men.
yes, and women.
And women. So do they, like, do the guys normally sport, like, huge beards?
Oh yes, beards are a big part of it. They're not live or die by their beards. There's other cultures, other dwarven fantasy types that the beard determines your age as well as your renown, and to cut off a beard is a huge offense.
It's more of a nice beard dude.
It's very much this is my beard. I take very good care of it. Because that it just is what it is.
It's not their live by, but they're proud of them.
They are very proud of their beards, but it's not an honor thing to have a beard.
It's just a thing they do.
It's a thing. It's a part of their culture and their
So they're
existence.
like little bikers.
Okay, yeah, actually, I could kind of see that. Yeah, only without the leather jackets. No leather jackets on them. They're they're not rocking the leather jackets.
They could be.
they could be. I mean, if you want to have your dwarf when you get the chance to play a dwarf in our world, and you want to have that appearance of let's go, you can make yourself a dwarven biker. They do tinker. They are our tinkers.
So they could have bikes.
They really potentially could. They could make themselves motorcycles.
Would they have made like transportation? Like, what kind of transportation do they have?
Yes, they have transportation.
So actually, dwarves are the ones who have the only ones who have a type of transportation that isn't like animal run. Like the Irbisals, our version of the horses. You have a carriage that's pulled by those, or the companions, and but the dwarves actually created a rail system that runs off of magnets. So it has like a tram with magnets. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Are they matriarchal or patriarchal?
Our dwarves are patriarchal by nature. They have a male leader
So this is our first patriarchal species
that we've gotten
Yes.
to.
that
Yeah.
we've gotten to.
Race.
The first made
Race, yeah.
Yeah. Are Irbisals matriarchal or patriarchal? Find out on From Dwindleton.
Not the answer is not a thing.
Not a
They
They're
don't have
horses.
they don't have a
What
society.
more do you want?
But yes, dwarves are patriarchal.
So who would their great leader be from the fall?
The great leader from the fall is the strong. Onizu the Strong is his name, the Maharaja, and he's the one in the board game. He's the one that developed the reverberation ability that you can use as a player. He's the one that developed that, and that would have been more about the tech and the armor than magic so much. And it's all based on like magic and magnets and technology and stuff like that. But he's the one that invented it. So
Okay.
So I hope that makes sense. Reverberation is a skill within the game where you take damage and you give it back. So it's effectively thorns in a controlled way. Is the best way to put that without giving away too much. And yeah, as your leader.
Splashback damage.
Yeah, splashback. Yeah.
Okay. How old do they typically go to? So
the
your
dwarves.
oldest is.
So the dwarves typically live about 250 years. So some of them will live older than that, some of them younger. But a typical age of a dwarf is about 250 years.
Okay. And then does gender change that?
No.
Okay. Sometimes it does.
The likelihood of a dwarf expiring ahead of time is either going to be through violence or ill-begotten experimentation. Experimental accidents will end a life pretty quickly, and maybe possibly being in the blast radius as well.
I was close to that guy who did something. I don't know what he did, but everything went boom.
It's not unheard of.
Yeah. So, how are your dwarves different from other dwarves, since we've already sort of talked about that?
Well, I feel like in a traditional sense, when you think about a dwarf, you think somebody who's a miner, right? So our dwarves dig caverns just the same way that you would think most dwarves do, but most of them are more miners, like they're getting materials. Whereas our dwarves are your tinkerers. And so in Severion as a whole, and so before the 1,000-Year War, and then between the 1,000-Year War and the fall, so those time periods, if another race needed something solved, they'd be like, oh, I need something solved. How do we do this? Let's go to the dwarves, because they'll figure out an answer to that. For the sake of argument, the orcs, which we'll talk about on Thursday, they have a giant wall that protects their cities. But then after the 1,000-Year War, the plains that is their land, remember we talked about the different land areas where this is the orc land and then this is the human land and all that kind of stuff. So the orcs have this giant area of plains that's not just Kungin, right? And how do I get from here to here, which is my other little city, without everything in the plains killing me? Because it starts to become a really dangerous place. Mm-hmm. And so the leader of the orcs, excuse me, at that time would have been like, oh, let's go ask the dwarves. They'll figure it out. And the dwarves went and inspected the land and everything. And they basically said, well, you need to develop like a sky bridge. kind of a thing. So the bridge goes over the top of your planes, and you don't actually walk through the planes. And so they went to the goblins to help construct them, because our goblins are our builders, our engineers, but the dwarves were the ones that designed it. So that's how they function in society. So the tram system, and then they had around their walls, the walls of Durzan would have been the highest tech defensive building that did not require anybody standing on it. So they created a flamethrower that could not be manipulated by a fire mage. So that somebody manning the walls of Durzan could protect the walls of Durzan, and then if a fire mage showed up, that wouldn't be affected by it. So that's the dwarves. So they're less about getting minerals and more about what can I do to create and innovate.
So they will mine just to the extent of, I need this material.
Yes.
So they'll go grab that material and then go do something with it, but they don't mine for the sake of mining.
No, they don't. They don't feel the compulsion to dig just to dig. They're not diggy hole dwarves.
Right.
They definitely also have no problems trading their services for resources. As a matter of fact, it's one of their more they have an entire ambassador team that goes and does that, where they're like, "Hey, we're here. Come to us." And this is obviously before wartime. And then if you want us to solve this, then we need this from you. So when they did the solving for Kungan, they in turn got a shipment of of grains and other type of food that was then delivered to Durzan over the time frame for their hey, we figured this out for you, and this is what's going to cost you.
So would the dwarves, goblins, and minotaurs be tightly woven, since they're all actually innovators and builders?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, the living flame cannons that they use to defend the walls of Durzan, the chemical compound was developed by the Minotaur
Minotaurs?
that allowed them to have their flames be so varied that the core manipulation couldn't happen from a fire mage.
Who made a potion and was like, let's light it on the fire?
Every Minotaur ever. I love the Minotaur too. They're so much fun. We'll get to them. They're way down the line.
They're the end.
They're the
very
last one.
Yep. So
You got a good one to end on.
No, are they the last one? Some got to the second to last, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, minotaurs are the last.
They're the babies. The crazy babies. Oh my
Big,
gosh.
crazy babies.
However, there's just the dwarves get so much good stuff that they get to work on. We talked about the tram system, and the things that they build there, and we talked about the fact that they are the keepers of time in a way. Like, one of their gifts that they were given was the ability to manipulate time for their experimentation purposes, as well as they have a clock, the quantum clock that everyone in Severion utilizes the timepiece for, because the dwarves disseminated that for resources as well as hey, look, we can do these kind of things. And they pretty much helped to regulate the entirety of the continent, since it was all one Pangea for a long time.
Does this clock have a specific look? Because whenever I think about it, I just see this huge grandfather clock in a cave.
I mean, we never actually gave it a specific description. Never, ever. But I like that. I like the description of, it just being this massive stone, permanent grandfather clock that exists.
I was thinking treated wood. Like what you'd normally think of the grandfather clock. Just size it up by 20 and stick it in a rock. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay, that's not bad.
I like it. We'll keep it.
Yep, it's happening.
Cool.
So they have the giant
Make it so.
they have the giant wooden grandfather clock set into a stone that is kept through, or is divinely given to them as
And
one of
protected.
and protected. Yep, it is, and that's necessary. One of the god gifts that they were given was that.
How is it protected? Do you shoot an arrow and it speeds up time for that arrow so it just dusts?
No. Time manipulation doesn't work quite like that. They actually have a whole unit of people that would spend their time guarding it. There's actually guards devoted to the time, they're the timekeepers.
Oh, so it's not
divine protected.
It's not divine protected, but it's really protected.
And it's well hidden. It is very well hidden, and its existence is not well known, but there's rumors that the dwarves have time manipulation. this is actually kind of so. This how about this time manipulation rumor is what sent a lot of cultists against
The dwarves.
the dwarves for a long time. So the dwarves suffered most from a bunch of like during the time frame of chaos when cultists of Vagog were popping up and they were just ransacking everything. They pushed heavily against Durzan because they wanted to gain access to time travel, is what they thought it was. I thought they could move through time. Never a thing. Not a thing in Severion. Time is not manipulated that way.
But that's why the walls of Durzan had to be so well protected, is because they were attacked. It's also why the other races were willing to chip in their expertise. And so when they went to the elves to ask for help, the elves developed a mushroom that was a life-sustaining mushroom that could grow inside of caves that light actually did damage to. So it would grow in a cave, and they could pull it out of the cave, and then
Vampire mushrooms?
no, not
like
vampire
that.
just cave mushrooms.
I put vampire mushrooms. Not a thing. We don't like that.
We don't have vampires, but this mushroom would grow in the caves, and the elves actually developed that so that if they were ever under siege, they could still be okay. You know, and they got grains and meats and different things from the other races when they were out and about and stuff like that. But more often, Durazan would be the one under attack from the forces of Vagog because they thought that Durazan had time travel, or at least the capability of it if they knew how to operate it properly.
So what does Durazan actually look like? You talk about this big wall, and they mine, which they live in like mountains, right?
Yeah, so I'll post a picture. But it's like, think of volcano, like a hollowed out volcano. It's a mountain, and then inside the mountain is where it is. But think a volcano that's gone dormant and has distance in the volcano between. It never was a volcano, but it has that appearance like it was. Does that make sense?
Like the top.
There's a
blown off
depression
crags.
inside of the mountain, and the city is set inside that depression inside the mountain.
Doesn't that make it easier to get into?
To some extent, and it's just the defenses of it make it difficult because the mountain's not easy to traverse. Plus, the walls protect, like the walls
They're
go
just
around
shooting
the outside.
flamethrowers down the side of the walls, so it looks like an active volcano.
Good, yeah,
There you go.
absolutely.
It's not active. The dwarves are just fighting Vagog.
They are. They're fighting cultists or whatever else decided to mess with them. And then during the 1,000-Year War, because of the development of these defenses, the dwarves were actually more formidable force because they could deploy more units and had to spend less on defense because the walls could be manned with such minimal effort. It was a terrifying function.
And during the fall, because again, after the 1,000-year was over, they would have gone back to a little more of a peaceful society where the cultures interacted with each other and traded and stuff like that. By the time the fall happens, the walls of Durazan are so powerful that it's impregnable. No one can get in, no one can defeat them, and they have the ability to marshal their forces to go out and participate in the war, and nobody can get into Durazan. What ended up happening was there was a back-to-back giant earthquake event that destroyed Durazan. And so the dwarves were left without their defenses. That's how they ended up being beaten finally by, I think it was the goblins. But when we talk about the specifics of the fall story, we'll get into that. But the back-to-back earthquakes was the reason that Durazan fell and wasn't, protected and successful.
And this was done in the game.
It was
Like
catastrophic.
the board game.
Well, yeah, when we did the playthrough in the board game, that's actually what happened. Is the dwarves, the guy playing the dwarves turtled up, played smart, kept it inside of the city, and then an earthquake happened, and then another earthquake happened, and then that was the end of the city.
The goblins bum
And the
rushed them.
goblins were there, ready to pick them off because they'd already been fighting with the goblins back and forth quite a bit.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So most of the key importance that happened in the story during the fall happened during your first game.
One of our first playthroughs that was official, yes.
Yeah.
That's how we determined who attacked who and when, was our very first playthrough.
Yep.
Like Buko just destroyed the elves.
Kind of, but it wasn't her that actually ended the
It
elves.
was Serona.
You
It was
can
Serona
you
who
can
did it.
destroy someone without actually ending them.
True. She definitely destroyed them. The Muscapert and elf conflict we talked a little bit was actually pretty aggressive, and then for some reason, and I think it was actually just out of spite, the elves ran to the halflings, and the halflings finished them off. And that's kind of what happened, but it doesn't read well if you write a story about like that. So you're like, okay, this is what actually we're gonna adjust this just a little bit, but this is how this happened. So
Dang it, lizards.
And so that's kind of the fun, is like filling in the
blanks.
the blanks, the gaps, and the reasons.
Yeah, there's a lot of
I see
fun
you,
you can
Dave.
do.
It's not my fault. It is what happened. We let the playthrough play it away, and the guy was doing really well until the cards determined his fall.
Actually, to give a little information, the reason that the earthquakes cause the kind of damage that they do to players that are still in the city, and then after 2 earthquakes it destroys the city, the reason for that is because of the guy who played the dwarves when we did the playthrough, turtled and won. Like and I was
game.
like, well, okay, that seems like everybody wants to turtle, and so I had to make some changes to that so that people didn't just turtle, because then everybody would, and it kind of defeats the purpose of
And then it'd just
going
be-
out and being aggressive.
who's doing anything. It's it's a waiting game.
Yep. And the idea is to wait aggressively. You want to have aggressive patience in our game.
Right.
You've got to know, like, you still got to instigate, but you got to know when to strike. And especially now with the way we'll get into the board game details another time. We'll actually do a whole episode on the board game once the Kickstarter gets kicked off.
Going, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give a shout out to that guy.
The
Heck
game
yes.
is a lot of fun.
I love
I've
playing
played
that
it
game.
like twice. Once while it was the 6-day thing, and once when it was shorter.
When it was 6 days long.
Yeah, no, the first time it was.
We'll talk about the
so
board game
long.
when we
yeah.
could talk about that all day.
Definitely
So-
could. All right, so we'll jump back into what other questions do you have for us?
How do they get their Maharaja or Maharaja?
Maharaja. Yep. All right, so they are inventors by nature, right? That's what the dwarves do. And so inventions and the value that they've provided to society as a whole is what will determine who is the greatest. So they don't have a bloodline succession. There is no, like, I bequeath my crown to this person. It is literally, you are chosen for your accomplishments, and if it is considered valuable enough to the world, then you get your point, you get your position.
So I made something neat. I see you made something neat. You're gonna lead next.
Pretty much, yeah. You have the intelligence, the capability, and the foresight to see through a problem. So we pick you because you have that capability. You've showcased it.
Much like the Muscaperts have, whoever's the best of the best, has demonstrated, gets chosen as the successor. This would be more of a vote situation, but it still would be based on competency.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
So it'll be like a science fair, but public. And then there'll be a public vote, which that
Science
comes...
fair is not public.
Well, not... A public spectacle, like a bigger spectacle than it is in our world.
So it's
Ours-
it's like a farmer's market, but a science fair.
Effectively, yeah.
like if you think you should be the next leader,
You showcase
come show
your
us
stuff.
why.
Yeah.
Show us your little volcano model.
I love it. Just picture this dwarf who's like, this is what I think we can do for the defense. He makes a volcano model and then accidentally blows up the city.
And one of the earliest leaders, not the very first one, but one of the earliest leaders, figured out a way to do technologically a voting system.
So they have a computerized voting system.
Kind of.
Well, not computerized, but
There's a voting system. The Society of the Dwarves
Oh, like the
is...
clicker, but for voting.
Well, so the Society of the Dwarves is actually interesting. It's really interesting just because every citizen is given a card. Excuse me. They have this card that determines your status. That card's how you access your tram. It's how you get your rations. It's how you get where you need to be. So if you're a citizen in good standing, you have an orange card, right? Everyone
And
gets
this is
one.
based on their intelligence.
No, this is just as a dwarf. This is how they operate within Durzan or their other communities, because there's more than Durzan. These cities are just kind of on isolated plateaus in the mountains, and you have to use tram stations to get to them. But you're given these cards that are your citizenship level, effectively. And the more vibrant and bright orange your your card is, the higher tier you are in society. So if you are just a regular citizen, just a regular orange color, and it'll get you to a certain point. You can ride the
is it
tram, and you
like-
can only go to this stop, and then you're done. So you can go to the market, you can go to the artisans, you can go wherever you need to go for that. But you can't go to like City Hall, the Inventors Hall. If you're not a defender, you don't get to go and have a tour of the dwarven
wall.
walls, the defenses.
So where does that color range from? Like a turd brown to a neon or
It's
Or rust.
rust?
goes to rust.
So think like a bright, neon orange would be, the Maharaja would have like a neon orange card. And
Then
then
shiny.
shiny. And then your citizens who are the low class citizens, they're the ones that are, just got out of jail for, doing bad things, and they're trying to re-earn their right in society. The dark end of society, which most people, like most societies, have those things. And so you'd have your darker end of society. Those would be like a rust color, like almost a blacky orange rusty color.
So just out of jail rehab?
Yeah,
Kinda, yeah.
you'd be lower on the spectrum.
Okay.
It
And
creates
then,
her.
is there like a specific way you increase your standing?
So think the middle of the road orange.
We'll have to take that question here in a minute. Finish your thought, Jeff.
Thanks, Davey. So middle of the road orange would be like when you turn 16, you're stepping into adulthood, right? And so that would be like a standard orange color. Just like if you went to the color wheel and you typed in orange, it'd be that color, right? And so anything below that would be earned in a negative way, and anything above that would be earned in a positive way. And so the more positive things that you participate in society, whether it be adding to the culture, adding to the technology, anything that is an advantage to society, you would get a better color, and anything that is a disadvantage to society, you'd get a negative. So if you were trying to rehabilitate, like you just got out of jail or whatever, your rust orange, right? And then you say, well, I want to do something to give back and earn my place back. You'd go to the homeless shelter and give food, or you'd say, I'll go protect the embassy that's going to do something really dangerous, at the risk of my own life for the sake of my people, things like that. And you would earn your way back up. So it's very meritocracy kind of a situation where you earn every step both ways.
So do kids not get cards?
Kids are exempt.
They're just kids.
So they have that normal orange, and once you turn 16, you can fluctuate where your orange is.
Kids aren't really left to roam free. It's not a safe place to roam free as a child. Like there's enough stuff out there that you can't really just be like, I'm a kid, I'm gonna go play over here and mind my own business. Nah, because
So they just kind of kept in the home.
they're taught, they're trained, and they're kept. Yes, they're maintained. It's like they're the first society to actually have a major school system where the kids go to, because that's the safest place for them. The schools are built in places where there are no experiments going around the school, so there's not an accidental kaboom.
It sounds like
They
something
get
that
shown
would be in The Sims.
experiments that are known to work.
Yes,
But there's no new experimental things.
yeah.
So
And then Davey asked a great question if you want to read it out there.
So Davey, it says Dave.
Yeah, it's Dave.
Dave B. So he essentially asks, can women participate in the science fair to become the Maharaja?
Very
so
nice.
much like the Muscaperts, where the females were dominant in the society and the males stayed home and watched the kids and stuff like that, they can participate. But the odds of them participating are lower, because in the dwarven society, your women are the ones that stay home and raise the kids. They're the ones that are teaching school, they're raising the kids, they're cooking and doing things that are more on that line of the homemaker side of things. And so while the answer is yes, they could, the odds of them
not
participating are low. And so in every society, the matriarchies and the patriarchies, there could be a leader from the opposite gender. So in the Muscapert, there could be a male leader, that just the odds are lower.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's possible, it's just not likely.
And
And
it
so
had-
way more frequently, you'll have a male leader.
And it has not happened to this point, to the fall, that there has been a female leader within the dwarves. Like, it just hasn't.
Has any of the races had a opposite gender of matriarchal or patriarchal in leadership?
I don't think so.
Since
No.
the fall?
I don't think before the fall. I think
It would be after
before
the
the
affirmation.
fall happens, life in all the societies are fairly like whoever's the archy of that society
Yep.
tends to lead and be more involved, and so you'd have higher level of the opposite gender, but your highest of each so on a patriarchy, the guy is always going to be the head, right? And it's viewed because that's how they were designed by Parbocon and Veritas Sanctus, was to be that way. And so it isn't like they're fighting over it so much. It's like, as a dwarf, I view the males as the head. Like, that's just how we were designed. And as a Muscapert, the women are the head. That's just how it's designed. And so women wouldn't compete against men in the same capacity with dwarves because they don't see themselves as the leaders.
Well, and would they be less capable, or just don't see it that way, so they don't try?
I mean, they're effectively running the entire social services of like the dwarven society, because the guys are out doing other things. They're doing the inventing, they're
Blowing
doing
stuff
the think
up.
tanks. Yes, that happens, and I make that joke quite a bit. That is a major hazard, because when experiments go bad things happen. But that it doesn't have to be an explosion. You can also have something that goes haywire that happens to have a lot of spinny blades that can spinny blade its
Or
way
corrosive.
around. Yeah, or like there's
Got a death Beyblade.
you could have Death Beyblade happen. Just you're minding your own business. The next thing you know, somewhere in the Rust District, this blade just goes decapitates some people. It's a thing.
Just another Tuesday.
Just another Tuesday. But no, like they run a lot of the societal functions. They're not excluded from positions of leadership. They just have a different format in leadership that supports the whole.
Okay.
It's never a lesser gender.
Never ever.
It's always just a different job,
Different role.
different role
Okay.
in society.
So how does their leadership work? We know that they have a leader, but how does the rest of it work?
Oh, how does the government work?
Okay. So they have a head tinker who kind of speaks for the Tinkers Union, effectively, for the Maharaja, or to the Maharaja, and says, hey, we have this, and they kind of handle the who's working on what with the experiments coming in. If you wanted to work on something and you wanted to get a certain amount of time, you still have to apply for it. So there's still a structured ruling, unless you're in the dregs of society and you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. Then you go to what we call the Rust District. It's where the ne'er-do-wells tend to
Rusties.
exist. Yeah, the Rusties. You would go there and do some illicit experimentations that are not sanctioned, that you hope work and could be betterment, but you're not getting approval with those.
You could get an upgrade to burnt orange.
It's possible, but the likelihood is not as high because you didn't go through the proper channels and you're kind of trying to subvert societal norms. And, that happens. I'm excited to get to this question here in a minute, Dave. But you have that, then you have your war council, who they're the ones in charge of the wall defense. They're the ones in charge of the military. They keep the Maharaja up to date on what's going on there, because ultimately the Maharaja makes a decision, right? All decisions come through the Maharaja.
So it's king and advisors.
Yep, king and advisors.
Okay.
And then you've also got like a slew of individuals who handle, like I said, the social services, day-to-day concerns, food storage, that kind of stuff. All of that is handled by the army of advisors that support the Maharaja and the people as a whole. So
Nice
yeah,
little press conference.
effectively. Only it's not a feeding frenzy of questions. It's more along the lines of, okay, what's going on here, and
They spout information at them.
or give reports. It will be a
Report is still information.
That's true. They give reports that are full of information and good stuff.
We only
And-
lost 10 people to decapitation this month.
I don't think, and so Dave asked a great question, kind of going backwards here, about the would dwarves be upset if a female participated in the competition or in some other leadership role set? And I think the answer is no. They wouldn't have a problem with
They wouldn't
it.
have a problem with them being a female. If they were just like a turd, they'd probably have a problem with them being a turd. But that goes for both genders.
With it being a meritocracy, it doesn't. If she is the best role to fulfill or person to fulfill that role, then absolutely she's earned it. There wouldn't be that, oh, but you're a woman situation.
Right.
Nah, none of that.
But like if we think about, so if we take it onto like the way that you view, just shift your mindset so that, like, let's say you're in the dwarven society. Okay, so you were created for a specific purpose, and as a male you were created to lead, and as a female you were created to support. Okay, and so even if a female came in, presented her work, both men and women wouldn't vote for her anyway, just on the sense of like you're walking past and you're like, oh, that's really great, that's really great, that's really great. And it's like, but that's somebody that's not supposed to be in a leadership position, so odds are she won't get voted for, and not nearly as often. And then the one that gets selected as Maharaja could go through and be like, hey, that one's really, really good, and it wouldn't matter that it's a female, and they would say, I want this person to be my head tinkerer. Mm-hmm. And so you would have a female in the second hand position. I wouldn't say frequently, but that happens throughout history.
More often than they would be Maharaj.
Well, before the fall, they were never Maharaja, but you would have a female head tinkerer, every now and again. So, and that wouldn't be uncommon or, unheard of or anything.
Well done.
Thanks, Davey.
All right.
So,
Yeah. Did you talk about the ambassador?
Not
the what?
too much. They have the ambassador, and we kind of touched on that the ambassador would be responsible for going out and offering services, like being more readily available.
They're
So
your
you would
door-to-door
have
salesman?
to. So what was that?
They're your door-to-door salesman?
Kind of, yeah. Almost like, hey, you have a problem, we can help you out. We're here, and they would be available, and then could help and gather this information up, and then come back and take these issues, and then the Maharaja or the head tinker would look at that and be like, okay, let's order these in priority. What's the most critical to the society?
Do you have a problem? Call 303durazan.com.
Durazan. 303durazan.com.
Call 303. What just happened there?
So your ambassadors from the dwarves, so the ones that went out, they would be looking for people who need their help.
Yep.
Right. And so the problems that they solved would generally be something that either the little band of could solve on their own, right? And they're like, oh, we could do this and this and this, and they kind of figure it out in the local area. So let's say they go to the halflings, and the halflings have like a small problem that the emissary group could solve. They would solve it right there. Anything that is your bigger ones, like your sky bridges from the orcs, or so they build this contraption where you can put it in the earth, and it will read which ores are deep, so that when the goblins are digging for specific ores, because they're the ones that are building things, they're looking for specific ores, they don't have to just dig and hope for the best. They have this little contraption. So that would have been something that the goblins went to the dwarves to ask for, as opposed to the other way around. So you'd have both. You'd have these big, huge, dynamic things that the dwarves were creating, that a huge group of dwarves in Durazan, the high-level tinkerers, directly under, the
Head tinker.
the head tinkerer, and they're creating it. The society came to them to ask, and then you'd have your pockets of little ambassadors going around solving smaller issues.
Okay.
So that's how.
Do the dwarves ever figure out how to get water to the halflings? So
Water-
that not everyone is drunk constantly?
Halfling's never drunk.
No, but
But
everyone else is.
that's because halflings. There's that fun thing where the halflings don't quite understand what's happening to other people. The idea of an alcoholic berry doesn't make sense because they don't experience that. So why would they ever have a problem with it? And then people keep coming in and acting a fool. That doesn't. Their eyes aren't open to the idea that, oh, this is actually a chemical reactant that's adversely influencing other people till way later.
Well, yeah, but the dwarves would go there, see it come back, and the minotaurs understand what it's like to be chemically influenced.
They
So
could.
they could be like, oh yeah, they just consume stuff that messes with your head and makes you think all funky.
It's possible. It could have happened, but never. It was never actually brought
No
to matter.
water?
There's
Not even after the fall?
well, because they have water. Water's available there. They actually have an oasis that their entire city is built around, and water in our world is handled by the arcanists, a different type of magic. They actually go and they douse for wells and help to refill, purify, and replenish. So you're not limited to a river or a lake or a wellspring that you have to discover in order to build a society up around it. You can have an arcanist troop come through and be like, oh, you want to build a city here? Let us build you a well. Let us fill you water.
So
Let us
that's who would
provide
have
you.
given Shota, the halfling city, would have given them water, not the dwarves.
Yep.
Okay.
Because that wouldn't have been something they needed to invent. It would be something they needed the
I was thinking they
arcanists
would
to do.
invent a way to get water there.
All the water in
Nope,
Severian
the arcanists would just
Yep.
build wells and
So you don't need to invent. Why would I go invent something like that? You can just call an arcanist.
Exactly.
What's
And-
the point?
If there's not a need for it, then there's not a need for it. And yeah.
Why would you?
Why
would you?
why fix something that's not broken?
Because I'm bored.
There,
Oh.
there's no shortage of problems that the dwarves can like the mysteries of the universe. They're in the process of trying to understand. You got dwarves that are working like quantum physics concepts, or they're like, what about pocket dimensions? What about this? How can we access that? Like,
Are we gonna get a bag of holding from the dwarves?
Well, no, remember, so up until the fall, right? So think the 30 years, or it's like 120 years between when they were created and when the 1,000-year kicks off, right? They have that period of time, and then they have like 2,500 years-ish after the end of the 1,000-year war, before the fall that happens. All of that time period would have huge advances, huge development, all those kinds of things. Once the fall happens, everything gets reset. So the fall, the destruction, and the rebirth all becomes when the Horakai destroy a lot of the forward technologically advanced things that happen, and then they bring them down and have more of a we're in charge structure, and then they start to bleed all the races together. So the dwarves aren't quite as dynamically influenced for, I'm going to go and create this highly advanced thing, because they'd be influenced by the elf that's next to them. Instead of set aside in their own society where they do that, they would be working in tandem with the other races. And so technology takes longer to build and develop, and it gets hindered a lot because the Horakai are in the way of it and stuff like that. And so after the affirmation, things go back to more of your medieval style world, as opposed to pre-fall, where the dwarves were like building tram systems that could float, because they were based on magnets, and they could send them to other territories, and they have these huge techs, and people are wearing watches and all that kind of stuff. That would go away.
Systems to cannons, like I'm building a cannon, or I'm inventing a toilet.
Well, they would have indoor plumbing for sure,
absolutely.
but
Why wouldn't you?
but a lot of that tech
It gets lost
is lost.
when the
Yeah, because giant earthquakes, and then gods reset the world, or
effectively, yeah.
gods.
So star travel wouldn't happen because it got hindered. If they had been left and the fall had never happened, they probably could have right away,
and then
like
wouldn't
pretty soon.
be what are they called? Fairies.
The
Sprites.
tram
Sprites.
system.
Sprites would come down and clean up the rest, right?
Yeah, the sprites were sent to after the fall and the destruction, and during the rebirth, they would have come down and rebuilt a lot of the cities there, but doesn't mean they would have had the capability to rebuild.
Yeah,
the
but you said they came
lost
down and fixed the world, so would they just get rid of
Yeah,
the
it
stuff
was-
they can't fix?
because it's trash.
Don't
They
don't
would-
think fix as in like they put it back to the way it was. Think fix as in like the city walls are standing again.
Yep, the city is built again, but the what contents are no longer there.
Oh, so you don't have the flamethrower?
Nope, you wouldn't have the stuff that was technologically created that was lost. That's gone. That's like lost tech.
The dwarves. So what would they do with that extra stuff? Because I bet if you knocked a tram system off, it wouldn't get fully destroyed.
It just was. If it wasn't part of the original design, the sprites wouldn't know what to do with it, and so you would have like these railways with no cars, because how do you run the cars?
And then
You don't
there's a
know how
car
it
at the
works.
bottom of the cliff. The
Exactly.
dwarves wouldn't see that and go,
Which
huh.
after the affirmation, the very first society that jumps in, the very first empire that ends up getting destroyed and doesn't become one of the main 4 empires during that age, was founded in Durzan. And they used the tram systems.
They were excavating the ancient technology that the dwarves had
And then
developed and were developing.
the Knights of End of Days came in and destroyed all of that. But the dwarven technology was excavated after the affirmation and used.
Okay.
So it was still for a while, but
I mean, eventually it
There's
does
a
kind of
lot of
resurface
interference.
because part of the way you have to get across one at the in oh gosh, the Garthia. Garthia, you have to use the tram system to get around in, because otherwise you would be walking for a week to get to one. Garthia's
Garthia's
massive. It's like 3 states wide.
And what ended up happening after the affirmation
I don't mean
with
East
the
Coast
dwarves is they became the pirates.
Yes, they did.
They were the only ones who knew how to create boats that could sail the ocean. And so they became the pirates, which facilitated when most people think, and even me, when I think of pirates, I think the guys on boats that are pillaging and killing and raiding and all that kind of stuff. In Severion, pirates are both that and the ferries that get across. So they essentially discovered a way to operate in the waters in a way that nobody else could. They can manipulate the wind. They can create boats that have
Weather resistant.
resistance,
Yeah,
but
because-
catapults, weapons, stuff like that. And so if you were sailing and you weren't a dwarven pirate, they would kill you.
Yep.
They would just destroy your boat and say,
your
hey,
stuff.
don't do that again. And then you would have to contact the dwarves, the dwarven pirates, to say, hey, I need to get, from here to here. I need to get from Garthia to the port of Bernarnagard. And so you jump in, you call the dwarves.
We've changed that name since. It's no longer Bernarnagard.
What would you change it to?
Okay, I want to go to Wabi.
Yeah.
I want to go to Wabi and the farm area.
Bernarnagard
So I have
to
to get a
Wabi.
boat.
No, we don't have Bernarnagard anymore. It was a fun thing to say, and we joked about the city, but
It has changed.
it has changed. Yeah.
But so in order to get on the water, to move across the water,
So they're the lords of the sea, and they're not okay with anyone else being there.
right?
Effectively, yeah, and
Not
it
pirates,
makes sense.
They're just territorial.
Well, they are pirates.
They are pirates. They're also
because
territorial.
they'll destroy
take
you
your
and take
stuff.
all your stuff if you decide to jump on the water without.
If you try to ferry goods from one place to another without utilizing the dwarven pirates after the affirmation, you have made a grave error in judgment, and they are going to make sure that you know you've made a grave error in judgment, and the cost of that is going to be your ship that you built, and the goods that were on it that were salvageable, and the lives of the sailors that you tried. Right.
And so-
do they keep you alive on purpose and just let you float, or do they kill you?
It is a ruthless thing. The sea takes what the sea takes, and the dwarven pirates are going to leave to the sea what it can have.
And the only thing that keeps them from like exploiting everybody is the goblins. So the
Yep.
goblins and the dwarves are intertwined from the get go. Like they coexist
They just
and
work.
yeah, they just work together. So the
almost like they're
the
gods
goblins
intended.
become your traders, right? And so they have a symbiotic relationship with the dwarven pirates, and so they kind of maintain the cost of goods from Garthia. And so the dwarven pirates only have so much control, because then they're like, okay, we don't have anything on land that we have access to. So to some degree, they keep each other in check.
Yep.
So
And that's also why because if the Goblin Traders Guild figured out how to attack the seas at the same degree that the Dwarven Pirates did,
They
then
would.
there would be a monopoly, and the pirates would lose their effectiveness. And it's kind of the same thing. That's why the pirates can't develop land caravans as aggressively, because they're going to get wiped out and raided by
Goblins.
But nobody can keep up with the technology advances of the
Exactly.
dwarven pirates because dwarves are tinkerers.
Yep.
They're going to be the ones that advance the fastest, and so
They
nobody
got
could
the Catapult 5000.
the catapult 5.
You can't even touch them.
Without the Catapult 5000. Oh, I love it. We definitely went way off the rails because most of the things we talked about, Garthia, the Dwarven Pirates, all of that takes place after the fall, which we haven't really talked much about in the other episodes. We'll have to do
That's true.
a moment.
Although
on
it is a big deal.
It is a huge
with
deal.
the dwarves because the dwarves are the only ones that really. I mean, the halflings do initially in just after the affirmation. The goblins do, and the dwarves. So those are the only three races that really kind of create a culture of a group of them that is still led by them for their purpose. All the other races kind of have their own, like they intermix and all that, and even the dwarves intermix and the goblins intermix and stuff like that. But there is a goblin society that kind of runs all the trade in the world. There's a dwarven society that runs all the shipping lanes in the world, and so it is kind of unique to those three races post affirmation. So we haven't talked about it because the other two races,
messed with that had major play in the after the affirmation.
Their whole lives got their whole like racial structure got reset
Oh, absolutely.
after the affirmation. For the lizards, they didn't really. They just went back to throwing fire at trees.
Well, kinda, yeah, because they didn't have the swamps anymore, and they still had a desire to master it.
they do. There is still a swampland.
There is still, but they're not the ones that dwell in the swamp. The swamp dwellers are a separate kingdom, and it's
right.
not
Well,
exclusively
they would have
Muscopert.
muskeperts in
Yeah.
them, but it is a kingdom of a variety of races.
Yep.
Well, yeah, but you can't really hinder magic usage. You just change where you're doing it after you've decimated everything in that spot.
Right.
Yep, but you have to be cautious at that point in time. You can't do the experiments that the old Muscopert were doing for the advancements of
The
magic.
elves are gonna come find you.
Well, the elves would have integrated into other societies probably the easiest.
Absolutely.
Because they want to help all land. And as soon as any of them started moving towards anything that was divine purpose, they would be building or they would be fixing nature. And so they would exist across the world as part of any and every organization.
To help this make sense, the affirmation, like the weather patterns around Severion started to get really weird during the fall. It started with the war, the constant use of magic, the aggressive this is the most brutal and unrestrained conflict because it was not for I have a small dispute. This is I'm going to kill you all.
So
That wild, rampant use of magic ruined the natural ecosystem as far as like the weather patterns. It made it crazy.
is that the reason why the back-to-back earthquakes happened? Is because basically the world was thrown out of what it was used to?
Absolutely. That magic, that creation. So that's why it became such a wild thing where it wasn't easy to grow crops anymore. It wasn't easy to maintain homeostasis, maintain life. Even after the rebirth, you still had freak blizzards that would happen that would absolutely decimate entire swaths of crops. Like you would have problems with that. You would have earthquakes that would come out of nowhere and collapse tunnels. And it was not a... We talk about it was a very quiet time because they had the Horakai were kind of telling them what to do. But it wasn't a peaceful time. It wasn't a good time because the weather, it was still nuts. And that doesn't stop. It continues that way after the affirmation. When the empire is starting to build up, Wabi is only able to do that because of its position where the landmass was and ended up around the world, where it has a more consistent weather pattern is what allows them to grow food more regularly with less interruptions. So kind of understanding food growth outside of Wabi is difficult and dangerous and not very fruitful.
For those cities that were on the edge when the continent split, is half of their wall just halfway across the world now?
Some of those cities don't exist anymore. The only one that's maintained is Kungan. Everything else gone. Zedge, the Green Wall, gone. Durzan, gone. Sank into the
It's
ocean.
just funny I was just thinking about it when the continent split and whatnot. Is there just a random wall on the edge of the sea?
There totally could be like you're just minding your own business, walking along, and you're following the coastline, doing some mapping, and you're like, "Oh, what the weird?
There's just a wall here.
That dwarven face is looking at me."
Why is there a wall?
Yup, that's totally a possibility.
All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get to wrapping it up.
Oh yeah.
Soon we're getting close on time. Do we have any more questions from anybody who's watching?
I do have one more.
Oh, you got
You
one.
lightly touched it. What would their day-to-day look like? Aside from the Rusties and the High. So what does a normal dwarf's life look like?
Depends on where you are in society. I think, like if you would do your job, like as the father, you would go and you would do your job, and you would whatever that entailed. If that was inventing, if that was, mining, it could be gathering materials, it could be defending, it could be working the wall, whatever. And then the kids we talked about would go to school. They go to specifically designated areas that were no invention zones. Like you couldn't invent new things there. And you would go, and these kids would go in school, and they would learn about what was already been experienced, and they would effectively give them a better jumping off point. And then these kids would then be taken, once they get a certain age and show a certain aptitude, to specialize much sooner than the other races. They would start to specialize their gifts and their skill sets. That way they could help to cultivate their intellect into a certain area. Like if they were like, oh, hey, I show aptitude for more mathematical type functions, then absolutely, you will work with these guys over here, and you guys go do math problems. Yeah.
You can be an engineer.
Right, and then someone who has more practical or more agricultural, they would all get kind of separated into different think tanks, which will be what it was, is different think schools. Schools of thought, not think schools.
Schools of thought.
And then, yeah.
This is called the brainstorm.
Well, that's what happened when all the dwarves got struck by lightning. I'm just kidding, that never happened.
A lot of knowledge was lost that day.
A lot of knowledge.
But that would be the day to day, and then it would just be you come back home at the end of your day for dinner, and your card handles your card, and we're gonna talk about this. The card is magical in nature.
Does it just change automatically?
If you make a mistake and you are caught in it, it is magically adjusted in color and in hue.
So if you're not caught, it doesn't change?
Exactly. You can do
Also a Maharaja that created that.
Yep. So your societal marker is there's a whole team of dwarves that are like constables. They're investigators. They're out there
They have Sherlock
keeping.
Holmes with
They
them.
do. They have a Sherlock Holmes who goes and investigates shenanigans and make sure that people are like assisting as they're supposed to, because sometimes intellect and advancement for the sake of advancement is not a good thing. So yeah, there is that as well. Anything else that came up that you thought
No,
of?
I think we're good. Yeah, so let's call it here, and we'll be back on Thursday, 1:00 Mountain Time, like we were today. And thanks for hopping in. We'll see you next time.
Excellent questions, Dave. Much appreciated. Everybody else, it's a pleasure. Have you.